But like Ola said, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education at the University of Iceland, and it has been a pleasure to be here and listening to your language. I do not understand anything, and that in itself is an amazing experience. But I will take one word with me back to Iceland, and that is not reflection, and it's not good morning, it's kakava. And don't ask me to reflect upon that reason. But I'm here to talk about findings from a 5-month testing project that was developed within the Reflect project, where we got some additional participants to join our project to develop like testing project that they would then take to their different contexts to experiment with using reflection.
They also want to hear that.
Here.
They also want to hear that side.
Okay. And here. And before I begin, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got involved in this project. I got invited by my colleague at the University of Iceland. And I think he invited me because of my experience of using reflection within the formal educational system in Iceland. So I began as a general teacher in deaf education in 2001, and from the very beginning there were so many things, complex things going on right in front of me, that I had to begin reflecting on what it was so I could respond to my situation as a teacher. And my main concern as a teacher was, how am I, as a hearing teacher, going to get beyond my hearing perspective or assumption about how you learn to read and write, so I can better be able to base my writing and reading instruction on the culture of my students and on the strengths of my students that were invisible to me. And my reflection got so intense that I had to go for my PhD to get a greater support to reflect. And in 2011, I defended my thesis, and the name of my thesis is I'm Deaf, Not Illiterate, a hearing teacher's ideological journey into the literacy practices of children who are deaf. Since then, reflection has lived with me, and now, as an assistant professor at the University of Iceland, I still continue to reflect on my work and write about my practice for publications. And I joined an international movement of practitioners called the STEP movement, or Self-Study of Teacher Education Practices, which is a movement of people that are interested in understanding their practice better, and they have been developing the methodology since the early 90s. So, and the little girl that you see in the picture, if you may have been wondering, it is me. And the reason that I did place it there is because through those reflective processes, I've so often had to revisit the little girl that I was, to explore and renegotiate the inner resources that my culture has given me to make sense of things that are right in front of me. And going through that whole process of going back into childhood and then into the situation that is happening in front of you has given opportunities to see things from different perspectives and maybe to respond to things differently than my culture have taught me how to respond. So now we'll be back to the Erasmus project. It's a collaboration by 4 European countries, Lithuania, Iceland, Belgium and Italy, and there were 2 participants from the formal educational system of academia from these countries and 2 participants from the non-formal educational system of these countries. And here is one of the pictures taken of the group. And what all these participants had in common was that they were all experienced using reflection in the different contexts. But this project brought all these people together so we could learn together from the perspective of formal and non-formal education how we can become better facilitators of the reflective process. So the general question of the project was, how do we become better facilitators of the reflective process? And we began simply by engaging in a dialogue, trying to explore and understand the different meanings and understanding we had of reflection based on the context that we worked within. And then we were also setting out to develop specific tasks that could then better help us understand this complex role of being a facilitator. So, and one of the tasks was this 5-month testing project, or testing phase. So the project began in January, and in September we invited 16 additional participants to join our conversation. And we had two participants from formal education of academia and 2 from non-formal educational system, the educational systems. And we began this process by inviting all the participants to a seminar in Italy where we would discuss reflection in readiness, the guidelines and principles, and then develop the testing projects. And then everybody went back to their home to trying out these testing projects and their experience of leading reflection in different contexts. And then in the final seminar, at the end of the journey, we met again in Italy, where we would share stories from practice and we would share the successes we had in facilitating reflection, but also the challenges that we were confronted with through this project. So, and it was the role of the University of Iceland. We were responsible for the evaluation report of the testing phase. So before we would meet at the beginning, we had to think of ways that could help us capture the experience that the individuals were going through and that we were going through as a group. So for the individuals to capture their experiences, we encouraged them to use reflective journals, photographs, drawings, video recordings, and whatever method that would help them to capture their moments. And then we also suggested that they might want to arrange a country group meeting once or twice in between the session where they would just share their experiences and how things were going. But for us to capture the experience of the whole group, we needed some more takeable resources that we could work from. So during those sessions in Italy, we would do participation observations, so we would make notes of the atmosphere that we were working in, the things that we were focusing on, the remarks that came up in discussion, and the dialogue people were having. We also asked the participants to turn a written description of the testing project to us, and in the end of the second seminar, we did like 3 focus group interviews. And in working on the evaluation, the focus group interviews kind of came our greatest resource, but we used the other resources to support our finding. And I don't know about your experience with reflection, but this was the moment where we were to pull all the things together and write this report. And all of a sudden we got this little feeling inside our stomach saying, no, we are not going to do it the traditional way. And no matter how much we tried to suppress that feeling, it came stronger and stronger. No, we are not going to do it the traditional way. Have you ever had this experience? So then you have to start thinking, okay, what other ways are there that we can be using? But the root of this feeling was that we were really concerned about how we were representing the reflective practices as it was emerging in the participant experiences in ways that would give the reader an opportunity to have multiple insight into these voices and start to make their own interpretation. So we had to go for a journey, like is often the case with reflection. We needed to find ways that could help us facilitate the writing of the report, since we could not do it in the traditional way. And we looked we began to look into art-based methodology. And when we started reading, we began to find some rationale for why we needed to do it differently. So first of all, form mediates understanding. We understand a phenomenon differently depending on whether we are writing text about it, whether we are doing drama, or understanding it through music or drawing. It provides different understanding of the same phenomenon. Art-based research also helps to disrupt the hegemony inherent in tradition of text. And we are all aware of that there is a great gap between academia and practitioners in the field, where it tends to that the academic knowledge is more valued than the knowledge of the practitioners, or the important knowledge of the practitioners gets silenced by the academic writing. And that was something we really wanted to avoid and bridge the gap between those two. And third, art-based research can evoke emotional responses that bring the reader closer to the work. We did not want the reader just to connect with the voices of our participants through cognition, but we also wanted them to connect emotionally. Because you understand differently if you are experiencing the process as a whole person. And then in the end, permitting silent voices to be heard. This was a real concern. We wanted the voices of our participants to be heard without too much of an influence from us. And the methodology that we came to know was the methodology of poetic inquiry, and it really allowed us to explore participant experiences. And just in short, what is poetic inquiry and how is it used in research? So poetic inquiry takes the words of participants and transforms them into poetic form. And the reason for working with the words of participants in that way is that by restructuring the words of participants, we can recreate lived experience to some extent and evoke this emotional response that I was talking about earlier. And also by working in a poetic way with data or written resources or words of others, we provide an opportunity both for the reader but also for the creator of the text to engage with the many voices of the participants and begin to reflect upon our own life and what it means to be in the world. And that is often the purpose of reflection. Who am I and who do I want to be in this world? So when we were satisfied with the methodology to work with our data, we began this process of exploring participant experiences. And the first step in the process was to transcribe the 3 focus group interviews we had done, and we ended up with like 80 pages of participant words. And then we transformed the focus group interviews into poetic form. And by the way, there were just 3 of us who were beginning working with this data, and we were all from Iceland, and we thought we really need to get to the insight, cultural insight of the other members of the group. So we took the poems that we had created from the data to share with the other members of the Reflect project to get their insights, understandings, and interpretation. So we would divide the poetry between the members and have them in small groups read through these and then give us their feedback of what they saw and what they were taking away from these voices. And from there, the participants from the University of Iceland, we each read and reacted to all the poems, and then we met to share and compare our first reaction to the poems and what we were hearing and how that resonated with the meanings our colleagues from the Reflect group were working with it or understanding it. And then in the end, we pulled together the message that we saw surfacing from the participants' voices. So now I would just like to invite you into the voices of the participants as they were emerging through a poetic form. And I would like you to start to make your own meaning of what their experiences can teach us about becoming a better facilitator of the reflective process. But when we read the poems over and over again, we started to hear the participants talk about that reflection was the relationship between thinking, feeling, and wanting. It was a living process. And to be a facilitators of the reflective process, we needed to be able to let go of control. To go with the flow, but still in a way that we would recognize shifting moments. When there was a need to fix moments, stop, and change direction. The participants, they also talked about the valuing the moments of not knowing, living through chaotic moments for new opportunities to emerge. And the participants, they had, what do you call it? It was different depending on who you are, how good you felt living through chaotic moments. They also talk about being present, slowing down, holding the space for the participants to move on and talk together. They also talked about living through moments of anxiety, their inner anxiety in working with the group, the value of listening, to live in silence and allow things to happen. They also talked about the importance of exploring our assumption in search for new opportunities, and to create an environment of trust, openness, and connection, and not be afraid to be yourself among other people. And they talked about the value of capturing your experience, like writing in the diary. It was just some words to begin with, but in the end, it told the story. And also, and the last thing that I'm gonna pull out from those poems was the importance of co-creation of knowledge. How we co-create knowledge together through a dialogue and through reflecting on our experience and the dialogue we are having. So that was how we explored it, and I hope that you can take the voices of the participants with you and continue to explore what they are saying about the importance or how we become better facilitators of the reflective process. And you will be able to find the evaluation report and all the other poems that we choose to put in there on our web page. It's not up yet, but it will be there.